Hello, everybody, and welcome to the CSTA's webinar series. Vancouver Canucks or Vancouver Titans, Toronto Raptors or Toronto Defiant. For kids today, esports teams and leagues are as well known as established sport events we know and love. 25 years ago, no one thought it would be possible to play EA Sports in front of thousands of fans with cash prizes. That is now a reality, and the potential for aligning your sport or your destination to these trends is of great interest to our sector. How can you bring these events to your area? What are the bid processes? What opportunities are on the horizon? That's exactly what we're here to discuss today. I'm Stephen Trainor, welcoming you on behalf of the CSTA. I'll be overseeing technology, taking your questions, and supporting our presenter today. Our speaker today is Jenni Brozena, Managing Director for Aqueous Sports Group International. Jenni is talking to us out of Philadelphia, and she is back by popular demand. Her Sport Events Congress 2019 session was such a big hit. We are really happy to have her back. Welcome, Jenni.
Stephen, thank you so much, and thank you everyone who attended that panel presentation and gave such great feedback. I'm so pleased to be back speaking with you.
Excellent. So before we talk to Jenni today and go through our webinar, I want to go through a few technology items. Now, I know some of you have already been on the GoToWebinar system and done webinars through us, but just for those that are new today, I just want to point out to look at the dashboard on the right of your screen. So I want to make sure that everyone is using the audio feature properly. So if you've dialed in on your phone, please ensure that you have entered the audio PIN number. Note that all attendees are muted due to the number of people on the line and to reduce distractions for all. So if you try to speak up right now to get my attention, no one will be able to hear you. If you are using the microphone and speakers on your computer as your audio, and if you experience any trouble with the audio during the webinar, it can most likely be resolved by switching to the telephone audio option. So please click on the raise your hand button to show me that your audio is working properly. I just want to make sure everyone's experiencing the webinar here. Perfect. Lots of hands going up. So another way that we want to work on today is if you do have a question, you can simply type your question in the chat box near the bottom of your dashboard, and I will let Jenni know if we have a question when there is appropriate time to pause or during the conversation. If you have a technology-related question or issue, please do bring those forward to me so that I can address them right away to ensure you get to fully experience the webinar. Just a note today that we're going to be providing a link to this webinar. We'll be doing a recording of it, and you'll be able to share that with your organization or refer to it for future follow-up. But I do want to test our technology today. I have a couple of poll questions that I want to ask. They're going to be important to our talk today. So the first question I want to ask is, the elephant in the room, what is your level of knowledge of the esports sector? So is it very good? You previously involved and hosted before? Or is it good, have not been involved but understand? And then there's the help me, no experience or looking to learn the basics. So we see some honest answers here. We've got, we're almost finished with 100% voting. So I'm going to close the poll now. And just to summarize the results, Jenni, we had 14% of those say that they have a very good understanding of the sector. 50% said good, and 36% are asking for help. The other question I wanted to ask, it's going to be really important here, is does your organization have a budget for esports? So please select one of the following: yes, no, unsure. So we've got about 57% of the vote coming through. You guys are doing a great job of answering this stuff. And we've got 100% of the votes. And just to summarize, 33% said yes, they do have an esports budget. 40% said no, and 27% said unsure. So that is going to be an interesting thing that we're going to talk about. So let's get started. I'm going to pass it over to Jenni, who's going to kick things off. The first thing I want to ask Jenni, I know the people that attended your session were very excited about what you talked about, but tell us a little bit about yourself and your forays into the world of esports.
Yeah, thanks so much. Guys, thanks so much for providing some honest answers. I think the best way for all of us to move into this particular avenue in the sports world is to be honest, because we're all learning at the same time. Esports absolutely launched as the wild, wild west, and we're starting to see, you know, who is actually ending up to be the Amazon of the esports world, who's starting to be the Walmart. We already have those players coming out, but to the rest of us, and to, you know, smaller or novice organizations, we have to have these honest conversations. So I do really appreciate you offering up that feedback. My background, I have my undergrad and my grad actually in sports science. So I started in the sports medicine and sports performance world, got the business bug, and moved over into the sports management world. So I have been the managing director of the Aqueous Sports Group International for a number of years now, and I actually ended up in esports because one of my relationships was, who is a nonprofit, funny enough, was looking for a way to engage with a younger demographic. And I had sat in on a panel discussion very similar to what, you know, what we had. It was about 4 years ago. And that panel discussion was tackling the question of what is esports, and do people need to know about it? And that particular panel had a group of, you know, very executive level rights holders that were in their, you know, somewhere between 50s to 70s, and they were looking at their fan demographics and saying, hey, I'm watching my grandson, I'm watching my granddaughter play these games, and is there a way to make money off of it? And I realized sitting there that I wanted to get into this playing field. So prior to esports, my focus was quite a bit in aquatic sports. Also some overhead athletes such as, you know, tennis or baseball. But when I saw the business landscape for esports, I saw a landscape that was incredibly young, and there was a way to make some great impact with other sporting organizations. So that's ultimately how it piqued my interest. With my work with the nonprofit, again, to reach that younger demographic, I said, okay, let's host a tournament that enables us to leverage some of the traditional business benefits that come from sports business, you know, things like sponsorship dollars, ticket sales, facility revenue from food and beverage. And then let's also find a way to have it be a charitable component to meet that nonprofit's needs. So that is ultimately how we led the first tournament, and I've continued to grow from there in our esports talks. Had a great time up in Canada. So Stephen, I will shoot it on over to you for another question.
Awesome. Well, that was a really good introduction and a description of how you came into so organically into the sector of esports. And one of the first questions that's come through is because, as we saw in the poll, only about 30% have budgeted for esports so far. There's a question about how do I make the elevator pitch to management about esports? So what would be the introduction or definition of esports?
Yeah, great question. All right, so ultimately, what is esports? Esports is competitive video gaming. What this landscape allows for everyone to do, though, is to find a game that is specific to the demographic that they're trying to reach. For those of you that are involved in sport tourism, we know that there are certain games that people are willing to travel further to in order to go and see competitions. For those of you that are rights holders, the vast majority of competitive sport has a video game attached to it that you can then go and build a tournament or a fan activation, any type of fan engagement. You can build that around. So I think the biggest thing that I, learned from you guys with those answers, and what we've talked to a number of professional sports teams, is that everyone wants to get into this space, and yet the vast majority either don't know if they have a budget or they don't have a budget. So I think now it's really important for everyone to realize that this is a space that is now mature enough. The esports space is mature enough that you have to have a budget in order to get involved in it. You are not able to put on a tournament or get high quality players that have any reach in order to help you put off a tournament or a marketing budget. You have to have a budget in order to get into this space. Now, it does not need to be a large budget. But you do have to have somewhere, even if it's, $5,000 or $10,000, to have someone that lives in this space come and talk to you and be able to explain it, talk to your marketing department, talk to your CR department, talk to your sponsorship sales department, and get it off the ground. The bigger, we talked about this a lot in the panel discussion, the ones that we're seeing on TV, these are the huge organizations that have made franchise investments to own their own teams. Not everyone is going to live in that space. And that's kind of what I was alluding to with, we're seeing who the Amazons, the Walmarts are, things of that sort. If a facility, if a national governing body, if a particular sports team is interested in dipping their toe into esports, hosting a tournament is a great way to go about it. If you want something that is a longer engagement, having it be more of a fan activation as opposed to a 2-day live event or 2 or 6 week online tournament is a great way to go about it. What we're seeing a lot of people get hung up on, though, is kind of this fear avoidance. They are unable to feel comfortable enough to go and fight for a $10,000 or $20,000 budget in order to get it off the ground. Whereas if there is a more proven, call it fan engagement, you can go and spend 10 or 20 grand on t-shirts for a fan or for a fan appreciation night, right? It's just that we have to have more of these honest conversations to get the fear out of the conversation and give people the right language to go and fight for even a modest budget.
Right. And so whenever you have taken those steps in order to better educate or engage yourself, moving forward, whenever there is, you're trying to set up a budget, what are some of the areas, if you were recommending to a destination, what are some of the areas of or pockets that you would be looking to invest a limited budget in?
Great question. So I would say it always depends on the end goal of the destination. How is the destination actually bringing in their revenue? Is it through hotel nights? Is it through selling food and beverage at a festival? Is it leveraging the esport activation, whatever that may be, as a part of a pre-existing, event engagement activation, something of that effect? So that is ultimately how I would start the conversation of identifying how they should appropriately use their budget.
Right. And can you give, I know that you are involved, so I don't want to have any sort of conflict of interest here, but can you give, in sort of generalities, can you give some examples of events and organizations that are, and rights holders that are best examples? So what are some of the things that these people do that have kind of been tantamount to their success?
Yep. So the NBA is absolutely a leader in terms of being innovative in their entrance into esports, in their budgeting and their risk taking for esports. So if you really want to look at a large scale organization, I would absolutely look at that. If you want to look more at destinations, you can look at any of the championships that have gone through the Barclays Center. When we are actually looking at, okay, what does it take to pull off a huge esport event? Something that's getting televised airtime. Look at the economic impact that's actually coming from the increase in transportation, the increase in food and beverage. We're now even seeing these guys and these teams having clothing deals. We've got full merchandise sales being attached to any of these competitions. So I would absolutely start to look at how those things are moving.
Awesome. So one of the things that you touched on a little bit earlier is you talked about the fact that there are different levels of esports. And I think that, would you see parallels between regular sport tourism, where there are groups and cities and destinations that have success at a much smaller scale than international events? So, example of Lake Placid, which everyone knows, everyone's probably taken their kids to a hockey tournament there. They've been able to see a lot of economic impact from using their facilities and their legacies from previous games to host minor level tournaments. And they they're not exactly going for anything large, but they still are seeing the economic impact. Is there space in the market at this point for smaller destinations to be able to realize successful esports events with economic impact?
Yes. So let's take it down to even the smallest, almost grassroots level, if you will. If you are a hotel destination or a team that is participating in sport tourism of youth sports, I mean, let's just talk about, you know, the kid that's involved in travel soccer team, right? If they are coming to your hotel because they are involved in a weekend-long tournament of traditional soccer, if your hotel is able and willing to work out a tournament during their weekend-long getaway there, your hotel is going to become an absolute premier partner to that tournament, whereas they could be going to your 3 competitors down the road. And the reason is because you have the technology, the offerings, and you know the activity that these kids are looking for. So at the smallest level, if you're able to pull that off, you're already a step ahead of your local competitor. That's really like the smallest, most grassroots. Now, in order to pull that off, I think it's really important that everyone looking to get into the esports space knows that you have to get the licensing approval from the publisher. I think that's a huge misconception too. You absolutely have to get the licensing approval. So a small place like that, how do they go and get that? Because let's say, you know, not to call out any hotels in particular, but let's say you have a mid-range hotel that is looking to increase their traffic and they're 20 miles outside of an airport, right? Right. That one hotel might not be able to get their foot in with a major publisher. Maybe their, you know, absolute highest corporate would be able to sign a deal for, you know, 100 or 200 locations, sure. But that one area interested in growing, you know, their offerings and decreasing their competition, they could go to a tournament platform company, you know, and I work with some of them. They're able to go there and build that relationship. That platform company has the pre-existing relationships in order to get the licensing approvals. So if you're looking at the smallest, lowest budget, grassroots way to separate yourself and show that you are in this space and get your foot wet without having too much exposure, you could go with something as simple as that.
Awesome. We have lots of questions coming in, Jenny. I'm just going to try and tackle them one at a time.
Yeah, shoot them off.
The first one is it asks about, you know, from your experience or in your research, have you found that whenever a successful rights holder finds a good location, they're looking to continue hosting that event in a particular city or destination if it's the right fit, or are these groups sort of always looking to open their bids for to be done elsewhere?
That is a great question. So you have to remember that whoever has the rights to the event and the relationship with the publishing house, they're ultimately the ones that are in control. So that's why if I am speaking to a rights holder, you know, they obviously have much bigger pockets than like that hotel chain that I was just talking about. So it's absolutely in their best interest to host their own event in order to keep, you know, that ownership right, in order to make decisions year after year after year. I do encourage people that if they are going to have an event come in, that they have a formal partnership that is multi-year, the same way that we build out much larger sponsorship deals or leases. Anyone that has a one-off event coming in, it's a far different conversation to say, okay, yeah, here's, you know, 50 grand in a rental agreement for a 3-day event versus, yes, we're going to build out a multi-tiered partnership relationship with you for the next 3 to 5 years, and you're going to keep the event coming in. Here's how we're going to divvy up ticket revenue. Here's how we're going to divvy up food and beverage, and actually moving in that way. That's what we're really trying to push the industry towards, because that's how the big esports players, they're looking to do that. Now, if you are a city and say that you want to have, you know, put out a bid and things of that sort, we are starting to see some teams, some events move in that space. But again, like I said, you know, where's your budget? if someone is interested in having a really established event come through, at this point, you can likely expect to have to pay some bid fees.
Right. Thank you for that. That's very helpful. Getting a lot of feedback that was a helpful question there. I've got a really great question here from someone that's seems to be quite inspired to be doing some hosting. They said, would like to get our venues more in line to be a good host. So
Yep.
What type of requirements are mandatory from a venue perspective? Unionized and non-unionized environments. So clearly this person is dialed in and is keen on.
Clearly this person knows I'm in Philadelphia, like the unionized capital. I understand.
Yeah.
I totally understand. Yes, so just the logistics of hosting an esport tournament. You need outlets, you need good internet connection, and you need increased bandwidth. Like, let's start there. Those three things have to happen. I made a little bit of I'm not going to say it's a joke, it's a little bit of a witty comment during the panel discussion when people are asking me the bandwidth requirements. When it comes to the specifics of that, I bring in my tech guys. So please don't ask me what bandwidth you need in order to have so many people. But when it comes to sitting down and having the logistics of, okay, can we actually host an event? One is are you working with, a hotel conference room? Or are you working with a hotel lobby? Or are you actually working with a stadium? Or now we're seeing a number of youth sport complexes setting up, youth training grounds for esport athletes. So is your space allocation actually just a corner of an existing turf field that has an enclosure to it? No matter what, you have to have enough outlets, Wi-Fi, and electricity and bandwidth going to that area. Hit me up with the second part of that question again, Stephen.
It said, it asked about the type of mandatory requirements, and then it said unionized and non-unionized environment. But I want to add to that just because I'm piqued interested. So you get the mandatory requirements taken care of, and then there's a question of what is it? What do some of the more successful events? What have they done to really improve both the participant experience and the people that are watching, so the spectators? Is there a certain way that people have gone about with the presentation? Obviously we've all seen it on TV with people sitting in leather chairs and the sort of the way that the rooms are set up to maximize the how many people are in the room. But is there any examples of best case or best example that you can share with us?
Yep. So let's go back to unionized versus non-unionized. Nor if you're dealing with any type of contractors union, electricians union, and plumbing unions, you want those three people or those three organizations on your side. If you have any challenges with city ordinances surrounding your parking in order to actually get people into your event, you want them on your side, and any type of mass transit. So that's unionized versus non-unionized. Your non-unionized people, again, the tournament platform companies that are actually helping you produce these events, they're the ones that come in and double check for things like outlets, bandwidth. They're the real production people. And I think that's when we go back to the budget question of what are you paying for? If you and your team do not know how to look at bandwidth and put this up and start streaming things, if that's not your Monday through Friday, get the production company, the tournament platform production company, to come in and do that. That's what your budget is actually paying for, right? Okay, so that's that question. Yep. Spectator experience versus in-person experience. Spectator experience is all about engagement, keeping eyes on the screen, which is different than in-person engagement, which is ultimately how do you keep them in the building and spending money, right, at whatever ancillary offerings that your facility has to offer. So the spectator experience, what we're seeing is quite traditional to, quite similar to traditional viewing, which is we have an awful lot of player commentary. We have an awful lot of background information on not only the players, but the game itself. People are getting B-roll in order to, sort through during commercial breaks or other breaks of that sort. So from a spectator experience side, you can really leverage any type of the traditional fan engagement that you're seeing for your other sports that are in-house, and we do have virtual equivalents to it. I think that's a big thing that people don't necessarily realize. You might not be well versed in esports, but again, if you're Monday through Friday, you're 10, 20, 30 years experience with fan engagement tactics, take what has worked and know that there are ways to make it virtual. You just might not have the language yet, and that's what, there's people like me that you can reach out to and ask. In-person experience, I love that you brought up the leather chair. I feel the leather chair is really getting a good take when it comes to esports. The overstuffed armchair look, it's ergonomically attractive. With the in-person experience, you have to allow the competitive, I'm going to say player, because I remember a lot of people got, they brought up the controversy around whether or not they're athletes at the panel. So the competitive player has to have certain aspects about the screen that supports appropriate playing time. And for any of us that are not competitive virtual gaming athletes, we don't know about that. So one of the biggest learning curves that I had with our first tournament was that we had to account for glare. And thank goodness for that tournament platform company, because they were able to not only identify different ways for the sun to be coming in through windows and be hitting mirrors in order to then go to the screen that I would have never even caught up on. They had solutions to minimize that. So, we were able to host that event in order to meet our KPIs. We chose to host it between 4 and 9 p.m. Right, that was the smartest choice for us at that time. That also hit prime sunset hours. So we did not pick up on that until the day of, and they were able to just have a host of solutions, and it became a non-event. So an in-person experience, one, you have to account for the players' needs. They almost always need to have some type of a desensitized green room that is completely screen-free, low lighting, overstuffed armchairs, things of that sort too, but that people cannot get to them, because when it comes to what makes this, player an athlete, it all comes down to their neural stimulation and their endurance in that capacity. So they have to have a desensitizing place to go to. For your fan engagement, you can absolutely go back to your traditional sport venue offerings. Food, beverage, merchandise, things to get up and walk around to, during their break times. If you are streaming, you can have commercial breaks, have some fun things for them to do. It really becomes much more traditional.
That is really, really helpful, and I think it really speaks to, as you said before, about trusting your instincts of, if you have 20 years of experience working with other sports, go back to the basics and find out what are the must-haves. You need to understand your sport, you need to understand your participants, and you need to understand your venues. So those are great examples of how you worked around sunlight and the needs of the participants.
Oh, absolutely. Because I think a big thing too is that you want to get into esports in order to make money, right?
Yeah.
We all want to make money. I think we have to get very honest about that. Are you making the right choice for your organization, your destination, your facility in order to make money? And it's really just understanding, is esports the tool that it is, the top line front runner? I'm able to sell tickets to this event, and that's where my money is coming in from. Or is esports a tool that is fan engagement, and I know that far fewer people are leaving this particular section of my facility, and therefore my food and beverage is not dropping? So I think we really need to encourage people to start thinking of esports as a tool in order to bring in money, but it's just encouraging people to know that you can still think traditionally about it.
I mean, we have tourists today that come to towns like Pittsburgh specifically for the culinary, all the cool culinary things that are coming. I mean, there's so many examples of people in the millennial generation that are traveling. It's not so hard to imagine that people would be traveling for an event, which leads me to the next question. A destination said that we looked into esports, but we're told by another DMO that it appeals to residents and is hard to attract tourists. especially when you're starting out. I don't know if that's valid. Jenni, what is your take on it?
I would say that it was a kind of a micro opinion that likely had a 1 or a 2 off experience. What we do know is that if you are hosting an event, it's just all about the marketing of that event. I would not say that if you are a smaller location that your event has to be regional. A lot of times we won't even open up online gameplay unless we have, a North American reach to it. If I were to go to a facility venue and say, call it Toronto, and just say, okay, well, I want to host an event in Toronto, but I only want to have the reach be a 20-mile radius to the finalist hotel, you're not going to get that many gamers, and therefore you're not going to be able to sell as many sponsorships, and you're not going to have as many viewerships during the 2 to 8 weeks leading up to the final. That's not an esports strategy. So a lot of times what you're seeing is if you are going to do a live finale that requires tourism, it's a destination's dream, because if you sign on, you get weeks and weeks and weeks of direct contact with people that are willing enough to either play or spectate, and you have the ability to market directly to them and give them reason to either drive, fly, get on a boat, whatever you need to do to get to your location. So I would not necessarily agree with that. I think it just depends on the rollout strategy that you're trying to do for that destination. Now, if you did want to do more of a regional component to it, I would go back to the example that I used with, having a youth travel sports league that might be coming to your local area, and you want to provide more of an activity to them. And you can, measure your revenue by additional rooms stayed in or additional nights or something like that.
Yeah, I mean that's. I think I've just would take a note of that myself to personally look for ways that we can document what exactly how many out of town participants are coming to some of these larger events. Obviously, I can point to a large one that received some media coverage in early February in Laval with 50,000 people, and I have to assume that there's so many out of town participants and spectators that have come for that event. So something for me and for everyone else to kind of look into to sort of demonstrate that proof that there is out of town tourists that are going to come, because as I can understand for the destinations that are on the call today, you have to make sure that you provide that case when you're looking for money for this foray. Another great question we've got, Jenni. We've got a lot of them. Hopefully you don't mind tackling all these.
No, go ahead. I love it.
Yeah, how do we find the bid opportunities? Sounds like a challenge to the CSTA about bringing some esports bid opportunities to a sport events exchange, but how do people usually find out about the opportunities? Do they have to be proactive and go after sort of publishers or the rights holders, or is there any sort of forums, conferences where they can be found and connected with?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that at this point in the industry, we're just starting to see the concept of bidding going out and, kind of like the back corner conversations happening. So absolutely, if you want to do bids, if you want to be proactive, absolutely get some grassroots relationship building. Let people know that you have the facility, you have the budget, you have the infrastructure, or you're willing to build it out with them. But be proactive about it. I do not know at this point in time, any portal that bids are just sitting on. That will change as the industry continues to mature. But I can promise you that all of the, franchise owners, they're making deals with people that they know and facilities that they trust, and the publishers are moving in very similar ways. So I would definitely do some grassroots relationship building there.
Awesome. Okay, so once again, be wary of your conflict of interest. You don't have to tell us things that are would affect your day-to-day work. But somebody would like to know if you could maybe provide some examples of publishers to be aware of.
Yeah, so actually, this is a simple Google search. You can go, and EA is absolutely going to be your biggest one that has some of the sports publications. I'm going to stop there, but I would definitely say just Google the top 5 publishers, and they'll just pop right up.
Awesome. Moving on to another question. When it comes to talking about the investment in some of the facilities or the system setup in order to host a great event, would you recommend investing in the systems yourselves if you're a destination, or just using outside companies that have sort of an expertise?
No, I think it's a terrible idea to make an investment in something you don't understand across anything. I just think that's a bad investment strategy. I would absolutely say if you have the infrastructure where you even could make an investment, then the first baby step in order to make a smart investment is to team up with someone that can offer you rental rates to host events and work out the kinks before you go and make that investment.
Awesome. I appreciate that Philly honesty. Come right out and tell us. All right. So, what resources exist to tie demographics to specific games? If you know your target, how do you match that to the product you choose for an event?
Gosh, that's a great question. That's someone that has some market research behind them. So these numbers are ever changing, simply because, that Wild West bit, and we continue to see the demographics change a little bit. The wonderful thing about esports, though, is it is far closer of an equal men, women, boy, girl than other sports. So I think there's a lot of strength that comes with understanding having more of an equal demographic in that perspective. We are able to take a look at some games, and I think we should probably backtrack. The game categories, you pretty much have strategy games, first-person shooters, and sports games. There are definitely other components to it. There are other verticals to it, but I think when we're actually looking at the competitive sport and definitely where our listeners are likely interested, those three demographics are likely what you're going to see. Sport pretty much is everyone, if not a little bit older. Your first-person shooters, for better or worse, whether you personally agree with it or your organization stands for it, our first-person shooters are typically the younger people, which is how Fortnite became massively popular. I mean, you hit middle schoolers and high schoolers, and it just became a huge, not even fad, but it just became the trend. And it spread like wildfire because everyone was playing it in school and then, with other walks home and stuff like that. And then strategy, typically you're a little bit older. So I think take a look at the demographics you're really trying to reach. Again, going back to keeping the end in mind, who are you trying to reach? What is their buying power? And then choosing a game within one of those three verticals that best connects with what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly, and you have to look at your tourism profile as it stands now, and maybe there's a certain segments or markets that you attract better than others. So maybe you could find a way to mitigate your strategy in esports with your current tourism strategy as well. Find a fit.
Absolutely.
That's great. So we've got a lot of people that are already inspired here. They're trying to sort of game the system, if you will.
Love it.
Jenny, back to licensing approval.
Yes.
Can you explain further? Do all tournaments require special licensing? For example, if you own the games or if you are using a platform like Smash GG, do you still require license approvals? What does it cost and how do you get it?
I will always be recorded saying, yes, you need licensing approval. You really do, because they own the product. They really, really do. Now, are there tournaments out there? Are there mom and pop tournaments that are out there that have gotten away with it? Yes, but I assure you that publishing companies are getting really great at watching that. Are there underground poker tournaments? Yes, but you shouldn't be doing that. So you do need them, and the absolute easiest way to go about it is to team up with a platform company. That is.
Awesome. And what are some of the examples of platform companies offhand that you recommend? Similar to what you suggest for publishers, or? Yeah,
so one in full disclosure, I have a great working relationship with them is World Gaming. They have they have an entire library of publishing companies that they've got great relationships with. So just to understand that a little bit, the platform company has already gone through all of the processes in order to get their approval to go and make money off of using their game. So simply by agreeing to use one of them, you're keeping all of that headache out from you, right? Whereas if you were to go and purchase a team, like part of the Overwatch League, the franchise owners are going to go and have the relationships with the publishing houses because they're going to own a franchise out of them. If you are simply looking at, entering into this space, you want to minimize your headaches, your exposure as much as possible. So that really is the easiest way to go about it.
Awesome.
And it's cheaper than a lawsuit, just to put it out there.
Yeah, I gotta echo your sentiment. No underground gaming, guys. The CSTA also does not encourage that activity. I have a testimonial, so this is awesome. Merci, Julie. Julie Dallaire with Laval wants to talk about that large 50,000 spectator event.
Good. Talk about it.
Yeah, and she said her comment was, we really felt the presence of tourists during that event in Laval. These tourists are really involved in their event. So it seems as though those that have gone into this world and have had those large events, I know there probably is some steps in order to get to that level, but they did feel an economic impact from the tourists. I mean, because when you have that many people flooding to a town like Laval, you're going to see it on the streets, you're going to see it at the restaurants, and that's wonderful. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Think about who you're actually attracting here. You are ultimately attracting millennials and the next generation below. I think we're calling them Gen Z, right? They have the buying power. And the wonderful thing about this generation is that they love the experience-based economy. Everything about their buying power is, what am I experiencing? And so to have a game or a tournament that already piques this really unique demographic, and then you put them in a brand new city that you can team up with your local, pub crawls and brew places and restaurants and everything else that your wonderful city has to offer, you've got a highly engaged, experience-based consumer. Of course it's going to feel like great tourism. I love that.
And I mean, it can't be that hard for us as sport tourists in the sport events industry to believe that, because as Rick Trainor, our CEO, likes to say, we are in a sector where we are relatively recession proof, because whenever times are bad, you can always have that staycation. But even when times are bad, are you going to be the one to tell your son or daughter that they're not going to that tournament in that place that you would probably never go to otherwise? And I think it's probably a similar situation for these gamers that are looking for the chance to play against the absolute best, or the chance to see the absolute best play. So I think I don't think it's that hard to fathom that.
Well, I think this too is ignored widely from a marketing standpoint. I think I would love to see some of the larger brands or those with creative marketing get behind this concept, is that this entire gaming community, right, are all connected by the internet. They do not understand what regional boundaries are. They have friends all over the world. They compete all over the world. So to offer them the chance to actually go and do something they love and meet up with people that they have an existing relationship with, they have a friendship with, they have, a history with, a lot of times, they're willing to go and spend money to go somewhere, because you're not only giving them, okay, yes, here's the tournament, here's your ticket, you're giving them the ability to meet up with people that for lack of any better option, they just wouldn't have a reason to go and be with. That's part of the experience sport tourism economy that esports offers.
Awesome. I have a question here. I'm going to adapt it a little bit because it's similar to one we had before, but it's more interest about finding out these. Our sector is very good at researching and following information. So they talk about how we're going to find out more about tournament platform companies and the hosting opportunities. I would turn that question around and say, Jenni, what should I be following on Twitter? What should I be following on in terms of websites or news sources, so that I can make sure that I stay up to date on any sort of opportunities or any sort of news that will affect me or my strategy?
Yeah, so pretty much every sports business content platform has an esports arm to it right now. I don't have any relationship with this company, but I know I get it in my inbox. iSport Connect absolutely has an esports segment dedicated to it. If you want to go more tech-based, if you have some cash to make an investment, you can even go onto Sport Techie. They also have esports. You can just, this goes back to Googling, you can do just a great esport newsletter. There, I forget the name of the headliner one. There are a few of them. Leaders, executives in sport, that conference is great. I attend most of them. They always push out some really great market insights about esports. They did a deep dive in their most recent one. They had something like 12 pages. Again, not attached to them, so that's just something that I always keep my eye on. But I think when it comes to choosing tournament platform companies, again, just out of respect for my relationships, I would Google that phrase. Even esport production company, you can Google that phrase. But I would definitely suggest that, when you are investigating or having your first conversations, ask them about what relationships they already have with the publishers. Ask them the legitimacy of those relationships. Definitely not calling anyone a liar, but do you actually have contracts in place? Are there already, is there a legal infrastructure that shows that you do have publishing rights or whatever relationship you have with them? The other aspect of that, I would definitely, you want to have publisher rights. I would start to identify some of the players that are influencers for the games that you might choose. Like we said, going back to those three verticals, you have, kind of more of your sport-based, strategy-based, or first-person shooter games. If you identify that, call it Fortnite is the game that best suits your end goal and your demographics, start to figure out who the influencers are on Twitter for Fortnite. And that's some just solid Twitter trolling, or find, a local 17-year-old to tell you who the best influencers are. But start the relationships through Twitter organically like that, really. But I can tell you this, that a lot of influencers, just to use your strategy of using Twitter, the vast majority of gaming influencers have agents, which I think Al Roy, who joined me on the panel, I think he touched on. He's great in this area. You are starting to already see the competitive players, the influencers, even the commentators all have agents, which means that they are quite costly. So I would, again, those publishing houses, they've got their own people, so that's a strength for teaming up with them. You get resources like that.
Yes, and just to give another shout out to Alain Roy, who was part of your session at Congress. We would have loved to have had him on, but just due to the timing, as a hockey agent, this is the busiest time of the year. And I was actually planning this webinar with Jenni. I got off the call and I saw Alain on TV actually hugging one of his players that have been drafted. So he's a busy
it's a good day for him.
Working on it. So shout out to Alain. We wish that we hope that you can be part of the next one, because this has been a great webinar so far. Another question here. You mentioned bringing in a company. It looks like there's some sticker shock here, and hopefully you can speak to it. Said when you're looking at it, price tags thrown around are 10 or 20,000. Is this a budget we should shoot for? And so what is the minimum we would need to host a mid-range tournament? Before you answer that, Jenni, I would probably say that if you're going to be making that investment in esports, hopefully you're going to have a bit of a strategy where it's not just a one-off. You're looking for multiple events during a calendar year, so that you can sort of lower the overall cost per event. But what would you say about spending money to make money?
If you are sticker shocked at 10 to 20,000, you should not be playing in esports right now. That's what I would absolutely say to that. If your budget is 10 to 20,000, the stage that your facility, your organization, you are absolutely in the planning and development stage, and you should utilize that money to work with a strategist to build out the plan in order for you to recoup your money. Anyone that I have seen that has tried to pull off an event with a $10,000 or $20,000 budget it has flopped completely. And the reason is you don't have the money to pay for a marketing infrastructure to let anyone know about your event. You don't have the money to pay for the equipment to pull off an event. You don't have the money to pull assets in order to bring sponsors, ticket sale, any of that. So it's not that 10 or 20,000 is wrong. Going back to that budget question, if you are low budget, what can you offer to do? If you only have 10,000, you're absolutely in the preparation stage, and fully support you working with a strategist to build that out. After that, then you kind of move into, okay, I have the ability to host an engagement. You're looking for some type of spectator engagement. That is how you minimize your risk, but you're minimizing your offerings. At the same time, you're minimizing the appetite of your consumers, because you're not hosting a tournament then. You're not competing. You might be having a 3-hour activation on your main concourse of your stadium and have some people sit down. That's not a tournament. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the baby step progression in moving up. But if you're sticker shocked at 10 to 20,000, you're just not ready to host a tournament yet. It's just not the right option.
Yeah, I mean that's an honest answer to it. I can't believe, Jenni, at one point in time we worried about filling up all the time. We're definitely we have even more questions here, but I
told you I can chit chat.
So we have a couple more questions to ask, but if you've got any last minute questions, please squeeze them in and I'll try to ask them. I wanted to bring the focus back to national sport organizations. We have some on the webinar. Yeah. I want to say welcome, and I think that they have an important role in these sort of events moving forward, especially since some of the games are related to their sport, and I think Absolutely. It would be really missed opportunity if they don't get more educated and involved. What can you tell me about, what would you suggest about ways that they can, properly manage the esports challenge?
Esports, from their perspective, is an absolutely great way to push skill development, character development, and overall love of the sport. All of our sporting organizations care about making sure the next generation is a fan of their sport, because there are so many more options to be a fan now, than my generation, 2 generations up, definitely 3 generations up. There's so much more competition for that fandom. So for a national sporting organization to adopt an esports strategy, we talked about soccer before. Let's keep working with that. If you can get a 10-year-old so excited about their developmental team that they are then able to then make the commitment to a travel team, and their parents buy in, and now they're watching competitive soccer on TV. They're buying jerseys. What a great way. They all have their phones in front of them. What a great way to then engage them in some type of an esport as well, because it's just another way for them to keep their fandom in every consumable way that they have access to. You have, in person through their training, you have traditional through their TV watching and their merchandise purchasing, and then you just add the esport component onto it. In order to counteract the negativity around, all these kids are just sitting in a basement, it comes back to the spectator experience, like we talked about before. If these kids are participating in streaming activities, maybe the national sport organizations push messaging in the dashboards or in the streaming of that game. And now all of a sudden you're pushing out things like life skills, character development, what does the sport actually stand for, how to be a great teammate, throw in some healthy lifestyle things, but the kids are consuming it. That is how you leverage both of those issues into one strategy.
In my opinion, Jenni, it seems to be a huge gap in the opinions of where esports fits with the overall sport landscape. And when we're talking about its involvement in the Olympics, a lot of hardline older school people are like, this is not something that can be done. And when you talk to kids of a certain age, They don't understand why these actual national championships or international events can be held, and at the same time creating a festival atmosphere of gaming at the same time. So, I think it would be pertinent for any national sport organization to explore the way that they can create added value, added participants and spectators to their national championships by bringing in those people that are there for gaming and those that want to see that gaming going on.
Absolutely, because it's all about buying power, right? If you as a leader of an organization want to say we don't support esports, it's not going to go away. It's just that those with the buying power, or that will have buying power within the next 5 years, they're going to go and build their own. And now you have a competitor as opposed to a piece of the pie.
That's right. So finally, to wrap things up here, I've got one last question. I know that a lot of people are dying to find out about it. It's really hard to stereotype what any type of participant or spectator is for a particular segment, for a particular sport. But can you tell me, if someone is successful at drawing people into town, what can we say about the demographics of people that are playing sports? I know esports. I know you touched on it earlier, but whenever these events happen, generally, what is the duration of the event? So how long will they be staying in town? And do we have any research right now in their spending profiles, or is that still new to the sector?
No, we've got a good bit of some general information. Right now, if you are hosting an event, you can anticipate people being around for about 3 nights. Typically, our finals are somewhere between 2 and 4 days. I would also recommend anyone, brand new to the space, if there is an existing, 5-day festival, something like that, if you can get, a 1-day activation, 2-day activation, but get some, 5 days out of hotel nights through a sponsorship of it, that's a way to extend that. So you're likely looking at 2 to 3 days, though, on the average for bringing people in. From a demographic standpoint, the beautiful thing is that the vast majority are millennials, who are now the largest part of the workforce, which means they've got cash. Even though they've got the student loan debt thing, they're still spending money on this stuff because it's experience. The other beautiful thing is that Gen Z has pretty much grown up with it, so they are incredibly into it, and their parents. Gosh, my generations are what is that, Generation X after baby boomers, I think it is.
Generation X, Y, something like that, yeah.
Yes, something like that. They are the most engaged parents out of any generation in recent recorded history. They want to spend the most time hyper engaged with their children, making sure that they are entertained than any other parental generation, which means that they're willing to pay for it. So even though Gen Z is too young to have the buying power, their parents do. So, we can no longer make the case that there's no money in it, because the vast majority of the people that are making up, the buying power are actively engaged in esports. There is a huge gap, though, between who's leading the organizations and making these strategies and then the consumers. That is a really big problem.
Well, I think people are going to need to make it adapt and sort of embrace esports, or else they might be at risk of missing out on something and even possibly being replaced. But
yeah,
I want to wrap it up now. We've had an amazing time speaking with Jenni today. I want to thank everyone for the participation. I think a record amount of questions. So I just want to say, our next webinar is going to take place tomorrow. It's going to feature social legacies of events. I think it'll be just as interesting as today, which was pretty awesome. So please don't miss it if you haven't already signed up. And if you have any ideas about topics you'd like to see in the fall whenever we restart our webinar series, or if you'd like to pursue a sponsorship to help us carry out these webinars, please feel free to contact me. Jenni, you're amazing today. I look forward to sharing the recording of this presentation with all the participants. Thanks a lot to everybody, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone.